Secretary Hale, I know that you focused your entire testimony on Iran, and while Iran maybe creates a focal point for our attention on AUMF, this hearing is in a broader context about authorities under AUMF. So let me start with you, Mr. String. Do you believe that the administration has any legal authorization to use military force against Iran beyond self-defense of U.S. armed forces and personnel in the region?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. As I stated in my opening statement, with respect to the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs, the administration has not determined to date that either one of those statutory authorizations would apply or authorize force against
Let me
Iran.
stop you there. Has not determined to date. To date is the very operative word in that sentence. And that's the same statement that was made to Chairman Engel in the House in a letter from Ms. Taylor, the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs. The administration has not to date interpreted either AUMF as authorizing military force against Iran. So that's not my question. My question is, does the administration have any legal authorization to use military force against Iran beyond self-defense of U.S. armed forces and personnel in the region?
Thank you, Senator, for pointing out the nuance in the letter. And it's important nuance because what we can comment on is the facts that are presented to us as attorneys in the executive branch. And the assertion that you referenced is based on the facts that we know today, that to date we have not made any such determination. I would also note that the Office of Legal Counsel has extensively analyzed the scenarios under which the president could exercise use of force generally with respect to any national security threat. That's not an unlimited or unbounded authority. The Office of Legal Counsel has laid forth two important...
You don't believe, as the president said, I think a day or two ago in a speech, that Article 2 allows the president to do anything he wants?
The Office of Legal Counsel has issued numerous opinions laying out the parameters, Senator, of any...
Well, that's a simple yes or no. Does Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States say the president can do anything he wants?
The Office of Legal Counsel has laid forth particular criteria that must be followed in any assessment of any use of force pursuant to the Constitution.
But if the president tomorrow, without any further provocation, wants to have military action against Iran, does he have any authorization as of this point in time to do so?
Again, Senator, I just refer back to the legal opinions that have been issued to date under this administration and previous administrations about the criteria that lawyers would look at in order to determine whether a use of force under the Constitution is justified.
Let me ask Secretary Hale, will the administration commit to seeking congressional authorization for any military action against Iran other than a self-defensive one?
I can certainly assure you, Senator, that we will act in accordance with the law and seek consultations with the Congress.
That's not a commitment to seek an AUMF. Mr. String, do you think it's necessary for Congress to pass a new AUMF in order for the administration to enter into military conflict with Iran?
Senator, thank you for the question. So again, I'll assert what I said before about the authority, longstanding authority that both Republican and Democratic administrations have determined to exist under the Constitution to protect the United States and our national security interests. It's a necessarily flexible authority. However, we are committed to keeping the committee, the Congress, fully informed about how we think about these issues. We've submitted a few months ago the so-called 1264 report, which talks about how we think about issues surrounding the use of force. We submit...
This administration generally is not very cooperative in giving members of this committee information, so I'm not too warmed by that suggestion. Can you explain the need for to date caveat in the letter sent by Chairman Engel? What would you expect the department's interpretation would change from to date to tomorrow? What would change?
Thank you, Senator. Again, as an attorney in the executive branch, we can only comment on the facts before us. It's a tumultuous region, and it would be difficult to speculate on what facts may arise in the future, and we would be asked by clients in the executive branch as to what might change, if anything.
Well, let me just say, I'm not asking you to be hypothetical, but the AUMF is an 18-year-old law that was passed without any thought regarding Iran. What would lead to a change in interpretation so that it could apply to Iran when the plain language, legislative intent, and 18 years of interpretive history remain the same?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question, and again, I just have to go back to the same statement
I'd
that I've
appreciate
made.
a real answer.
Well, we can't comment on hypothetical, factual
It's
scenarios.
not a hypothetical. I've just told you the facts. That's not a hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical at all. It was very clear. Iran wasn't even in the focal point 18 years ago. Iran is not mentioned in the AUMF. There's nothing that has happened that original AUMF authorized. This caveat that to date creates a great deal of anxiety that you are all going to use this, interpret this authorization, which is beyond the pale, to enter into a military engagement with Iran other than in response to a action that protects our personnel and our military. And I have to tell you, there is no appetite here to accept such an interpretation. And at the end of the day, we're not going to get dragged into a war when we have authorities over monies. So we need a clear response, because I'm not asking you for a hypothetical. I'm asking you based on the facts that exist. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, let me first thank you for extending courtesies on both sides of the aisle in the time limitation on an issue that is of great importance to members, so I appreciate that. Let me ask you, Secretary Hale, in April of this year, Secretary Pompeo testified before this committee and said, quote, "There is no doubt there is a connection between the Islamic Republic of Iran and al-Qaeda, period, full stop." Is that the administration's position, that Iran and al-Qaeda are connected?
I really can't improve on what Secretary Pompeo said in an earlier.
Don't try. So is that the position of the administration, that Iran and al-Qaeda are connected?
He stated that, and that is the position.
Right, so to what extent? To what extent? Give me some depth then. To what extent are they connected?
The issue I'm aware of is the continued provision of safe haven to al-Qaeda by the Iranian regime. That is what I'm aware of.
So,
longstanding.
Mr. String, based upon that alone, has the department, as you as legal advisor, determined whether this connection would be sufficient to use force under the 2001 AUMF?
Senator, as I think the Secretary himself made clear, he was not making a legal conclusion as to those links. And as we've discussed earlier, the administration has not interpreted either the 2001 or the 2002 AUMF as authorizing force against Iran.
So you haven't come to any conclusion as to whether that al-Qaeda connection invokes authorities under the 2001 AUMF?
We have not made any determination to date on that question.
Have you been considering that question?
Senator, we are constantly vigilant on these issues in responding and assessing threats. I just have to return to my previous statement that to date we haven't made that determination, but we continue to be vigilant.
Did the 2001 AUMF provide authorization to respond to the IRGC's takeover of a British ship?
Senator, I prefer not to get into hypothetical.
No, it's not a hypothetical.
examples.
That's a reality. The Iranians took over a British ship. Does the AUMF give you the authorization to respond to it?
Again, we have not interpreted either the 2001 or 2002 AUMF to authorize the use of force against Iran.
What about in response to Iran exceeding JCPOA enrichment limits?
Senator, I'd have the same answer with respect to that. The 2001 or 2002 AUMF have not been interpreted to date to authorize force in the respect that you just laid out.
It could not be interpreted as such.
Again, I go back to the statement that I've been repeating that we haven't interpreted to date based on the facts before us.
Well, since I very rarely get the legal counselor before this committee of the State Department, let me turn to another subject that maybe you can be more elucidating about. You're familiar with the recently concluded U.S.-Mexico Joint Declaration, are you not?
Yes, I am, Senator, of June 7th.
Good. As an expert on bilateral and multilateral agreements, treaties, and other types of international arrangements, you know the difference between a binding and a non-binding instrument, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
So let me ask you a simple question based on your legal expertise. Just give me a yes or no answer. Is the U.S.-Mexico Joint Declaration binding for purposes of international law?
Senator, that is an important authoritative agreement that the governments of the United States and Mexico entered into, and we are in the midst of implementing various elements of that
I asked you if it was an
agreement.
authoritative agreement. I asked you if it was binding for purposes of international law.
Senator, I have to give the same answer. We view it as an important authoritative agreement.
That's a non-answer. I don't practice these days, but I did at one time, and that's a non-answer. It's a non-answer to my specific question. It's so beyond my pale to understand why the department is so reluctant to answer a simple question. You signed personally the supplementary agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
In that agreement, I see phrases like, quote, the U.S. and Mexico will begin discussions to establish definitive terms for a binding bilateral agreement. That sure doesn't sound binding to me. So can you tell me, why has the department been so reluctant to answer this basic question?
Senator, I believe we've provided answers to questions that your staff have raised with respect to the agreement. We continue to be engaged in important discussions with the Mexican government and other governments in the region about burden-sharing issues.
Your answers have been totally non-responsive. And it is the non-responsiveness of these answers that has led me to use the limited tools that the minority has, which I've been in consultation with the chairman about, in terms of just getting a simple answer. Is this a binding international agreement, yes or no? It either is or it isn't. If it is, fine, then we know what goes forth from it. Though we don't know what the agreement is, which is another problem. We don't know what the agreement is. Does the department intend to submit any part of this agreement to the Senate for advice and consent?
Senator, the parameters of an agreement are still subject to discussion both within the executive branch and with our partners. So I don't have an answer on that.
You have an agreement. So if you have an agreement, then you know whether or not you'd be submitting it for advice and consent or not. Does the department view this as an executive agreement?
The agreement that we're discussing with regional partners currently?
The U.S.-Mexico Declaration.
The U.S.-Mexico Declaration will not be submitted as a treaty to the Senate for
It will
consideration.
not be submitted as a treaty. Do you view it as an executive agreement?
Again, Senator, we view this as an important authoritative agreement that's been agreed to.
Will you be reporting it under the Case Act?
Senator, we're still looking at all those questions internally in the executive branch.
Well, so here's our problem. You're before the oversight committee of your department. You can't give me a straightforward yes or no, is this a binding international agreement? We can't get a copy of the agreement. It's the most coveted, secret agreement that should be very clear. We cannot get a sense of whether or not you consider this an executive agreement, whether you're answered under the Case Act. Why can't you give us simple answers to those questions?
Senator, I'm trying to be as forthright as I can. We're still in discussions about the parameters of the agreements that you've referenced. So several elements of this.
So then you don't have an agreement. If you're talking about the parameters, either you know the agreement, the four square elements of what the agreement is, or you do not. If you do not, you don't have a final agreement then.
Senator, we do have the June 7th declaration that you mentioned. That is obviously complete because it's been posted publicly. So I can talk about that, and I can talk about the agreement that you also mentioned about the important commitments to pursue additional discussions That's what I can talk about at this stage.
Secretary Hale, is there any reason you cannot provide the committee with a copy of this agreement?
I'll have to come back to you, sir, on that. I've not been as informed as Marik has been on the detailed legal aspects of this agreement. So let me get back to you and get back to your staff.
It's not even the legal aspects of the agreement. That's for the legal advisor. Just in general, you're the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. Why can we not get this committee, the Committee of Oversight, not get a simple, hard copy of the agreement?
Let me take that back to the department and get back to you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this is the challenge that those of us who are interested in what this agreement is and believe we have the right to see the agreement and therefore decide what is the appropriate policy, maybe in support of what the president did, maybe in criticism of it, maybe in part support, maybe in part criticism. But you can't have this committee and its members seek to make judgments without having basic information. This is basic information. So anyhow, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me.